open to 1 Peter chapter 4. And we're going to be in verses 7 through 11, okay? Okay, so tonight I get to speak a little bit about understanding the difference between church and other things at school and sports teams. Things that kind of take a lot of our time up, and those are good things, but I think what happens is we take those experiences at school on our sports team sports, and then we kind of bring those attitudes, while not wrong there, we bring those attitudes and we kind of treat church like a sports game, or we treat church like school and it becomes like a popularity contest, or we treat the church kind of like a competition to be successful at the church. And really sports are typically about achieving and performing, and it's really not what church is about. And I think sometimes it confuses us, and then we'll have a lot of our heroes stand up and they'll kind of use those platforms in a good way to speak about Christ, but we don't really understand sometimes maybe the difference between them. And so it confuses us a little bit. So we're like, well, I went to church. I had some Christian friends on my soccer team. It's like, it's not quite the same thing. And so we need to kind of take some time, I think, to talk about that. And I remember being on a sports team. I remember being at school, and I was always kind of confused about how they were a little different. So we're going to talk a little about that tonight. I remember when I was in youth. I went to the same youth ministry for 7 years. And I remember that time, a lot of the kids that were the leaders of the youth ministry were always the football players. They always were the football players, at least in my youth ministry. And they were nice guys. They were, but it was always kind of the sports figures were like the Christian leaders in our youth group. And so it kind of made me feel like I had to be that, or I had to kind of have that winning attitude, or I had to have kind of like that successfulness about my Friday night games or something to kind of be on stage or to kind of help lead. And I always was kind of confused by that. So that kind of led me to thinking about, how should we be different than that? And is there good stuff in there? Or there's some stuff that maybe confuses us? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about the difference between church and school, right? We said church is really supposed to be a place that's not about popularity, okay? It's also not a place where you should just kind of get lost in a crowd like school is. It's a place where you should step out for Christ, but it's for Christ. It's not to step out for yourself. It's not to make a name for yourself. That's kind of what we said, right? Well, tonight we're going to talk about sports, and we're talking about two things tonight. What church and sports share, team sports, what I mean by sports is team sports, what they're in common. There's some good things that are in common. But then how are they different? And how should that lead us to treat church differently than maybe a sports team? And I think that will help us a little bit to understand what church is about. So we're in 1 Peter 4. We're going to be in verses 7 through 11 tonight. And there are some truths in here tonight that we're going to see that are going to challenge us on how it's a little different, okay? So we're going to start in verse 7. Here we go. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. And whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, means prophecy. Whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, and to him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. What a great passage. 1 Peter, not really thought too much, especially when you're a Protestant, but 1 Peter is a great book that teaches a lot about practical truth about what it means that Jesus died for us and how we should treat one another in the church. It's a great book for that. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight is how are team activities, and maybe not just sports, but academics, how are things that are based on teamwork out there kind of similar to the church? We're not going to spend too much time on this, but I think there's some points of similarity, because I don't want you to go away and be like, Ross thinks sports are bad. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's differences, and you need to know the difference, okay? There really is difference. First, team sports like baseball and basketball and soccer and cross country and et cetera, academic bowl team, yeah. All those things are team activities. They're based on positive stuff like working together, communication, valuing each person, right? The church is very similar in that way, okay? The church is similar. You are important. God says that you are an important person, and not just an important person, but you are an important part. So that, the church says, hey, you're an important person, but guess what? you're also an important part of the team. No matter what position, no matter what part you play, you are critical to our success. So let's think about in our own youth family how that makes sense. For those of you that have served on the leadership team, typically the leadership team is made up of all older kids, right? That's probably a good thing, right? It's probably a good thing because you've been in youth longer, you've been in church longer, you probably have some more things you've learned to apply to leadership, right? That's kind of where our older kids typically are at. Service team, you think about that, that's typically some of our older kids, right? People that can do some heavy lifting, people that are kind of, stick to it for 8 hours or whatever it is. I didn't see a lot of junior high kids using a scraper on the floor, okay? All right, so that's kind of where our older kids were serving. But think about our younger kids. Now, a lot of those younger kids that we have in our junior high, they're serving on what? The creative team or the drama team, right? They're doing different. You see a lot of our junior high kids on the worship team, right? All of us are important. We all matter. We all have a role. We all have a part to play. And for our success as a youth family, it depends on all of us to take part. Not just the 5 or 6 kids that are popular, not just the 5 or 6 kids that want to do everything, not just the good kids, not just the churchy kids, right? It's learning to do it all together as a team. And I think team sports teach us a lot about that, okay? Those are things that the church shares with team activities and team sports, okay? And they're good things. We need that, okay? And I think we do that pretty well here, and I'm really proud of you all for that. So just kind of thinking about those things we share with team activities and team sports. But what about the stuff that we're different on? First thing I want to say, how does church and team activities and team sports differ? Here's the first thing. If you're taking notes, you're just putting down a couple of lines. Here's one to take down. It's not about your ability at church, okay? It's not about your ability, okay? It's about your availability, okay? It's not about how good you can do something, okay? Sports are basically based on your ability, all right? I mean, I've used this example before, and it's always funny to me, but every time my favorite football player, he's kind of toward the end of his career, Adrian Peterson, I see him, after every interview, he's like, you just put your mind to it, you can do it. I'm like, no, you can't. You can't just do it. Like, you have a freak body. You can run a 4.4. You can bench 25 times 225 pounds. Like, you are a freak. You can't just do it, all right? Your ability matters in sports, right? It's what separates you to get on the team, right? That is not the way church works, okay? Church is not about your abilities. Technically, it's really about God's ability, okay? It's really about God's ability, not our ability. In fact, the Bible makes it really clear it's in spite of our inability. We don't even have really an ability to offer God. So think about it like this. You think about God's law, think of the 10 Commandments. Think of what God tells us to do. It doesn't take us very long to realize you and me, we do not have what it takes, okay? Right? You're like, hey, I want to be on God's team. I think I can help. You look at the law, it's like, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. You're like, not on the team, I'm sorry. Right? And it's just that way. You don't have what it takes, okay? So while sports and teams activities, a lot of it is about your abilities. Church is not about your ability. It's about God's ability, okay? The second part is it's also about your availability. I think this is really awesome. And it's important, too, because when you're on a sports team or a team kind of activity, what about the people that don't have the physical ability to do certain things? They just kind of get what? Left out, don't they? See, that's why it's so important that the church is not about your abilities, okay? It's about your availability. Let's look at verse 8 and 9. Here's what Apostle Peter wants us to be available for at church. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly. Here's another one. Show hospitality to one another, caveat, without grumbling. Well, that sounds like a competition spirit in there. I can do it better than so-and-so, so you grumble about it, right? It says that you should love each other earnestly. You should use hospitality. You should not be competitive with abilities, it says. And it also says here that we should use our gifts to serve one another and speak well of one another. So here's how God wants us to be available as a teammate at church, to build each other up, right? To not be about who's got what ability or who can do what or what somebody can't do. It's, are you available to earnestly love each other? Are you available to welcome each other no matter where you're from, no matter, what stigma you think you might have or that person might have. Are you doing that? Okay, that's the first thing. It's not about your ability, but are you available to love people? Are you available to support people? And are you available to not complain about people? Okay? That's a big difference, isn't it? Because when you're on a sports team, if someone doesn't come through, you basically curse them out, right? You're just like, I can't believe that person, right? Like, you tear them down. As soon as they don't do what they're supposed to do, you destroy them. The church says, no, don't grumble about people. It's the complete opposite, right? So it's not about your ability, it's about your availability. Here's the second thing, that the church is different from team activities and sports. This is going to be a hard one, y'all. But sports and team activities, it's all about winning, right? It's all about being winners. It's all about being successful. Here's what the church is about, serving. Oof. But Ross, I thought it was about being the best. Nope. Not at all, actually. It says here, let's look at the verses again. Verse 10. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. So not everyone's going to have the same gifts, but all of those gifts are supposed to be serving one another. If you have a competitive attitude when it comes to, and what I mean by that is this, when you are trying to be better than other people to lord it over them, that's what I mean by being a winner or successful or having a competitive spirit. It's all about you. That is going to take away the opportunity completely to serve people. The church is not about winning or being better than people. The church is about serving and being lower than people. It's actually what it's teaching, okay? So here's what I want to finish with tonight. The church is not about being winners or even being successful. The church is going to redefine what it means to be winners. It's going to redefine what it means to be successful. Here's what the world says. If you win, it's going to really bring you a lot of greatness, isn't it? So I love football, like most people. And if you have done a lot of winning at one school, what do they tend to build for you? Anybody? A statue. Not just any statue, a statue of you, right? It's all about you. Look how great you are. That's what winning gets you. It gets you this legendary status, right? They have in culture now the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. It's all about winning, about being the best you can be to create some sort of fame for yourself. That's really what winning is for in this world. Success in the world's terms is trying to find as many people that will worship you as possible, right? Follow you, work for you, right? That's really what the whole world's about. And a lot of times team activities, it kind of breaks down a little bit like that. It kind of starts to become a little bit like that. Here's what winning looks like in the church, making Jesus famous, okay? Here's what success looks like in the church, picking up trash after somebody. See, it's just very different, isn't it? It's just very different. And sometimes we've got to be careful while we're being successful. And don't get me wrong, you want to try your best out there, okay? You want to do well. But to bring that type of spirit into the church is just very different from what the church is about. So I want to encourage you all tonight. I think it's important the better you can understand what the church is, what this is all about, the more you can get what this is all about, the more it's going to stick with you long term, okay? So this is what we call the nature of the church. What is the church as a thing? What does it really mean to be in the church? It means not to be winning, but serving. It means not to really be about being a rival to somebody or trying to lord it over somebody, but learning to serve that person, okay? And team sports are great. They teach us a lot about success, and it teaches a lot about communication and team building, but ultimately it breaks down at that. So what I'm saying is the church is very different, ultimately, okay? A win, a W, looks very different at the church.